Good day to you. This is another T-Talk session about T-theory. And again, in T-theory, basically it predicts a duality in the universe, a dualiverse, in which we have a fundamental, like before the Big Bang, we have a fundamental singularity, and this singularity is infinitely dense, has no space-time, and in this regard has infinite energy. And then we broke symmetry and ended up with a space-time membrane. And we currently have timeless energy access to the supersymmetry that is creating the energy. And in this regard, we currently have the moment of now, the flow of time. And so we're always kind of relating everything to for the concept of the nature of mind, to the past, which we have our memories, to the moment of now, in which we also imply our intentions into the future, and thus apply our intentions at the moment of now, or just as we process information, it all happens at the kind of moment of now. And at this moment of now is where the being, the I, am, as far as where we are located. Now, I heard from a Nobel Prize physicist, David Gross, in which he mentioned, you ask him what fundamental reality is, and he'll say fundamental reality is something that's going to be calculated, can be measured, or observed. And in this regard, T-theory mentioned that, well, okay, that sounds pretty good. We, in that regard, calculate, measure, and observe. However, can anything be calculated? Can anything be measured? Or can anything be observed without the existence of a mind? So, basically, a mind is doing the calculating, a mind is measuring it, and a mind is observing. So, in that regard, mind, T-theory has to be part of the fundamental equation. So the idea is, how do we get to the concept of mind? And that's what T-theory is trying to develop as kind of a fundamental, functional model of how the mind works. A functional model, not a scientific one, but theoretically, the goal is to have it line up with what science predicts, and that's what T-theory is kind of about, in which it is taking the physics from the scientists and trying to see a perception that ties everything together to how the nature of our mind works, to how it relates to mathematics, to how it interrelates to time, and what fundamentally T-theory has always said is, what is the single thing in the universe? And we've talked about energy. So energy is the fundamental thing that everything needs to be related back to. But in the sense of the concept of mind, in the past talks we've talked about what the mind's eye is, and in the sense of the concept of physics, where you're going to observe something, there has to be an observer. So in the concept of what's universal to kind of everything is you need an observer, like in Einstein's theory of relativity, whether it's special relativity or general relativity, you need observers. One's relative to the speed of light, other one's relative to gravity, but how they impact space-time. So you need an observer. And of course we talked about the mind has to be part of the observer, so that's where we're talking about the nature of mind, how it relates to the now moment, and the relationships we've talked about. So we've talked about the mind's eye, and the mind's eye is basically the observer. That's who the observer is the mind's eye. So this concept that we have inside of us, a mind's eye. All of us have our own individual mind's eye. So this is the eye of being, in which this is the observer, is the mind's eye. So everything's related to this observation state. This is not one in which we're judging anything. We're just observing things and where energy comes into us. behind us, we've talked about stations of the mind, in which the idea is that we have these comparing stations, in which we're comparing things to. So, in other words, as far as the mind's eye input, we have both the outside world, if we're conscious. We have the outside world that will be impinging on the mind's eye. But behind the mind's eye, we've talked about the Glasser model, William Glasser model of stations of the mind, which we have these kind of comparing stations in which we have our past, our past experiences in which we've built internal realities, our memories, and things like that we've experienced, that we're drawing upon. Those are inputs into the mind's eye, as well as the outside world, our intentions. Our intentions are also part of what we want to happen, which are part of the input into the mind's eye. So there's a central point in which the I, the being, this would be called the mind's eye, the one that's actually just observing it and experiencing things. But then we also talked about the concept of the dream center, in which both the concept of the mind's eye and the dream center are the same kind of concept, in which we're trying to say these are fundamental senses of the body, of the mind, and that would be considered fundamental. And because if you can sense them in this fashion, then you can have greater functionality. So that the idea here is that the dream center is also a center that's in front of us in time. When we're asleep, we have this dream center, which is basically like a kind of gravity center, which it causes things to come together, and it's in front of our mind's eye, because basically that when we're having the dream, we're here observing it, and there our dream center is going and collapsing the wave function in front of us of the things that may be related to our past experiences from that day, the same day, or things that we want to have past experience from our past a long time ago, or things that we want to have in the future. They could all influence what the dream state is. But in the concept, when we're dreaming it, when all the senses of our body, in other words, in which Glasser's model I mentioned about, it's kind of now gone to the unconscious state, in which we're talking about the internal world and external world on his model, and just all the different behaviors and things like that. We're asleep, so we're not getting from the external physical world. We're getting our inputs now from our own internal world. And so that the idea being is that if we talked about the I, who am I? I is basically the mind's eye, and this is the observer in the experiment. This is the one that's taking the energy in. We have the energy going to senses. So again, the mind's eye has to be a sense in which we're getting the experience coming in. And then from there, we get a perception of what the relationships are, and that leads to thought and consciousness in that kind of perceptual order of things. And then the me, so the I is just the point of where everything's related to the mind's eye. However, the me takes into account the things from the past, things we want to have into the future, and what we're currently experiencing in the moment. So the me, as far as an individual, is kind of related to all these other kind of systems of functionality kind of being set up so that we can sense them. And just as we all have our own individual dreams, so there's an individual part of us, but there's also a universal part of us. So again, individual versus, again, that duality. So the individual is individual to us, but what concept for the human being, for humanity, is what is universal to humanity then is going to be, we all have a mind's eye, okay, that is individual. However, all humanity has a mind's eye, in which this now is a universal kind of concept. Likewise, we all have our individual dreams in a dream state. However, we all have a dream center which is sensing an energy and causing it to collapse and form. So that's kind of the T-theory model on the relationship to these are relationships inside of our minds, relative to our mind's eye. Some are happening in front of us, such as the dream state or collapse of the wave function, or sometimes our awake state, which theory is also predicting that this is actively going on in our creative mechanism in the awake state just as well. It's just that our consciousness is overriding most of this creative mechanism, our dream center. And then and so that the idea here now between the eye is the mind's eye, where we're just experiencing things. So we have a reference point in time relative to our past experiences, which we've talked about, our personal identity. In the sense of our personal identity is related to what we would have ever since we've had childhood, and we can remember things and events and how we are the same since way back when. Our identity, even though our body has turned over many times as far as cells, we're a totally different person, and as far as the chemicals and nutrients that make up our body, yet we've dynamically maintained a stability of identity. And in T-theory we've talked about also that be relating back to the Planck sphere and the singularity being the source of possibly a server, so to speak, in which we upload our personal experiences up to this server, which kind of preserves our identity over our lifetime. Yet it's our sense, the fact that our brain itself has DNA that make up the proteins of the brain, but the brain acts as a sensory receptor for the energies having access to this supersymmetric force field, which, how do we keep things, whether it's in a hard drive or in the past days on a tape, is that we'd have a force, magnetic force, which basically captures the information, whether it's coming in analog with electrons, and puts it onto a tape or to a hard drive, but obviously the hard drive has to be moving. Of course, we also have RAM memory these days, but the idea is that there's a place of a medium in which that information gets kind of stored to. Now, we're able to do it on a physical realm, but our identity stays stable throughout our lifetime. So the idea is that in that concept, we would be having experiences into our brain, our mind interpreted into experiences which actually have the senses to access the supersymmetric state, and thus kind of upload our experiences so that we would have identity throughout our lifetime, because we continually have the same DNAs we've had that actually make the parts which are the sense receptors for this access. And of course, things that would affect that access, such as Alzheimer's disease, where you can't maybe get the signals or recover the memories that are there, as well as the photographic memory, in which you can remember everything, and which happened 10 years ago. Very few people are like that, but sometimes they have idiot savants or people that have had brain injuries or whatever, that either early on that develop the ability to have these extraordinary capabilities of being able to have access to again information and recall it in an instant, as if they're accessing something. In T-theory, that's because they developed a hyper development or sensitivity to the access to this, basically the singularity state, or the supersymmetric state. So likewise, again, individuals that would have a past identity, lifetimes that may have lived 100 years ago, if they for some reason had a unique, when we are forming cells and the DNA splits, there's the random events that are also there, capable of changing the DNA arrangement to create new opportunities for utilizing the energy sources, such that we can thus try to evolve towards new skills through evolution in time. However, fundamentally in T-theory, it's that the the conscious states are actually there due to force fields that, like the Higgs field for the Higgs particle, that these force fields that help not only with the particle's existence, but also the relationship of molecules, such as how they bond, the chemical bonds between the atoms themselves, as well as the folding, so that the force fields are actually embedded in space-time itself. And part of our behavior and identity is related to the capability to have senses to these force fields, in which we have, again, for the eye, we'd have the mind's eye as being an identity that is universal to mankind, that would be called an identity. We have a dream center, which would be in a center that precedes our mind's eye. We would have memory, which would allow us access to the past, and thus we have all these different inputs into us, and that makes me, because as me as an individual, I then relate that to what my purpose may be, so to speak, related to the things that I've developed as an individual. However, fundamentally, what is universal to us is that we have this mechanism in T theory of this kind of ordered layer of things that are in front of us, inside of our minds, which is a kind of convergent state, and that actually this convergent state has a great relationship to our intentions. And the idea that the intentional state may have been because it became aware of itself earlier in time at the singularity before it even broke symmetry. So that would be one of the predictions, in which if it truly was intentful, then the breaking of symmetry itself would have been an intentful state. Thus we would have two functional aspects of physicality. One that was the symmetry of the intent from the beginning. However, to break symmetry, there has to be a randomness involved to be able to break that symmetry, so inherently into something physical would be a random event. Of course, we have in the thermodynamic laws, what we observe is the energy can't be created nor destroyed, but it can be transformed. It basically, energy goes towards absolute zero as far as the heat energy. Energy has a relationship to mass and the speed of light. Energy has a relationship to just a wave packet and its frequency. So energy has a lot of relationships, and of course we have matter in this world, which are the physical things, such as this board here, my hand, all the things that we see as far as atoms that we can physically see, as well as the air molecules that we can't see. They're all held together by universal forces, and the idea, such as a strong nuclear force, theoretically holds together the protons, which, if that weren't there, all reality would disintegrate into nothingness. However, the question here is, this universal force, is it individual in time, such as it has its own individual time, or is it a universal in time, in which this time holds all the forces for everything across the universe from the very beginning of after breaking symmetry, what we call the Big Bang, to now? Whether there's a universal implementation of a force, so that's an efficient force in which it's a single force that is across the entire universe at this instant moment that applies to all atoms, versus is it each atom has its own individual force, in which, again, T theory, based upon the concept of life, the life being basically energy that is more accelerated and more efficient and satisfies more functionality and has more symmetry and mathematical relationships to it than other pieces of material, that this indeed is a reflection of something that is more fundamental, which would have been how we develop our individual ideas in which unite us, such as our thought, our consciousness of us as a humanity versus our personal identity, because basically humanity is a universal identity. So the idea is that how do we incorporate both our personal identity into it, along with a universal identity, and understand how our individual functionality exists to the moment of now as well as into the future through how we see our relationship to our mind's eye, to humanity as a functional level of understanding how we operate, what things develop. Again, in the Glasser model, the concept of the emotions and our logical aspects come into play. And in T-theory, we're trying to reach a point where we can actually access our human creativity more by understanding these fundamental mind mechanisms that theoretically are related to the energy. What's the single thing in the universe is energy. Energy in T-theory is being created in a certain state. We're having the sense for this creativity in the sense we have the sense for the passage of time. We have the sense for gravity and convergence of things. We have the sense for randomness. And we have the sense for the intent to survive, as well as intent in general. All beings and all things have the intent. So the idea being that I am from where the state here in this, as far as identity, I am the being, I am the mind's eye. The me in me is both the mind's eye as it relates to our past experiences as well as things in our future, such as the dream center, or it can be our physical, as we're sensing life physically. And then the other aspects that we're trying to see this relationship, so that then the you has to do with how that's related to this physicalness that we have, you as an individual, and but as a being too, that is universal to humanity versus individual to your own personal states of experiences. So the more that we can understand that we all have these capabilities and reference points inside our head, and that we're making these relationships. The we could be to a community, to a society. Now, obviously, if we live in North Korea, we'll have a different mindset than if we live in the United States, versus if we live in Italy or China. The idea is that culturally we are influenced by our culture, how we've gone through history and time. Those will influence us collectively, but make us both individuals, but related to a society. But again, related to our personal identity has to be over and in time, which T-theory is predicting that range is basically the supersymmetric singularity in front of us. So that there's a fundamental duality, just as physics utilizes the supersymmetric mathematics to predict particles. They're accepting the reality that supersymmetry exists kind of as a guiding force for a possibility in reality, and mathematics seems to be the kind of the holy grail of physical reality. So the idea that for them there's an absolute mathematics that applies to everything throughout all space-time, and thus that's the fundamentalist, or the one that basically says that we have no free will, that everything's mathematically related. However, if we observe human beings and our physicalness, then we would realize that just the mere aspect of us being physical, having a living being system, whether we're an animal, fortunately we're conscious enough to be able to observe and differentiate time elements and energy and time to to be able to name things and come up with ideas, and like mathematics and so forth, so that we obviously can sense the order and the relationship and the symmetry that's there, which is related to energy, and that's what mathematicians and theoretical physicists use. But at the same time, we're in a broken symmetric state, and at the same time, we're not going towards randomness in the sense of humanity's mind. We're going towards convergence. The fact that we're living belies what would normally happen over typically random events, where there's got to be force fields in the force fields of life itself, of space-time, that have force fields in it that want to drive us to survive, that drive us to have intent to do things, such that we're being a sense for it. We're being sensed for this energy. And once we have the physical matter there, the molecules are all there, then life takes off. Once we have all the particular ingredients, the force fields will automatically put it together and cause that path to go. So, in the idea of mind, in the moment of now, we're trying to be aware of these force fields that also have opportunity to take to influence the outcome. And it's our human creativity is in part in being able to identify partly our personal identity, who we are through our experiences, versus what is universal to humanity on a universal level, and trying to figure out as individuals, how do we get peace? As a humanity, how do we get at peace? Because peace represents the resolution of the errors that occur within us. And when our fundamental goal is to unify things. Our fundamental intention is to organize and see the order of things, such that we are riding on this wave of energy for the understanding of the nature of reality. And that guiding sense is an intention sense that all things physical experience, whether it's an individual cell that doesn't even have a nucleus, or it's a species in between, from being, having a new yeast to protozoa to the whole evolution of the stability of the DNA. Now, DNA in itself has adenine, guanine, thymine, cytosine. Those atoms have not changed over in time. However, their order has changed, and it's like zeros and ones, that we can change the order of the zeros and ones to be information. The arrangement of the DNA can be arranged to have information in it. Or, of course, all information requires some sort of force to move it from one form to the other. Remember, energy is not created nor destroyed. However, these forces that are moving the energy, the forces themselves may affect space-time, but they may not be derived from space-time, such as in T-theory, gravity is created in the singularity force, and thus it appears weaker to us because we're on the space-time membrane. Thus, it precedes us in an energy state, yet obviously we were influenced by the supersymmetry of the supergravity. However, its measurement that we would experience would be a lot less because it's not on the space-time membrane compared to, say, the strong nuclear force, which we would be able to measure because it's a positive, say a proton is going to have a positive charge. You're going to be able to measure that more directly because it's on the space-time membrane and not causing it, not causing the space-time membrane, you might say. Anyway, so the idea is that we're again related conceptually. For us to experience anything and have a perception something exists, have thought and consciousness, those things are based upon us having senses. So the idea that we have the sense for convergence, we have the sense for randomness, we have the sense for the passage of time going. These are all energy states in which they have to be energy, and we have the sense for it. So we have to have functional senses those functional senses are consistent with the laws of nature of gravity, entropy, time. What time is, time is not an illusion, only in the sense that we as sense receptors are an illusion, and we're not here. We will pass away, become extinct. We are the illusion. However, the creation of time itself is not an illusion, and also that explains the arrow of time, because once you create energy, you can't go backwards. It only can go one direction. So our nature of mind has to do with the moment of now, our reference point to the past and to the future, the relationship of energy, and how energy, we talked about how the gravitational pull of energy that is accelerating can cause a pull force, and that pull for the future is due to the fact that we have this timeless energy access to the future, which is the singularity inside of the Planck sphere. And the only difference between the first moment when we created this Planck sphere and now is that we have an infinite number of space-time, so we have an infinite number of Planck spheres so that are embedded in space-time. So that would be like the pixel of, the infinite curvature of space-time is at the Planck sphere range. That would be the point where space-time comes into existence. And also right after that, string theory, then right after that, the laws of all the forces and laws of nature. And of course there has to be a tension on the strings of string theory to be able to cause the strings to resonate and cause the other particles, such as the strong nuclear force, to occur out here. Again, for in T theory, the other bonding forces that help chemistry, such as carbon-carbon bonds, carbon-oxygen bonds, just the general periodic table, and the nature of the bonding of the spheres of the atoms themselves, and the arrangement of the electrons take around the orbitals of those atoms, and how they interface with other orbitals of other atoms and create their bonds. So that those forces are, again, further out. Also would involve the natural folding of, say, functional molecules that occur, even shown in biology, in which proteins expedite what would normally happen in normal space-time prediction. If it took say it takes 500 years to break down a group of sugar glucose molecules, in the body can be broken down into minutes. The minutes, basically, we've shortened the distance in getting to a place in space-time, shortened the distance to extract the energy, shortened the time to extract the energy. We adjusted all the kind of the laws of the special relativity, the density of the molecule, the functionality of the molecule of the enzyme allows it to break down a molecule, which, like I said, would take normally hundreds of years on its own to do, minutes, so that the functionality of everything increases, so that life itself is an acceleration of energy in which we shorten. We're applying kind of the laws of physics, in which, again, how a travel, if we're being accelerated, if a protein is in an accelerated state, it basically shortens the time distance from things getting to places. In the case of this is a molecule that's changing from glucose into ATP in the body. So the idea is that these forces are also embedded in space-time that cause the folding of the proteins that cause for the functionality and what is ultimately life. So the life forces and everything, just as the Higgs field is for the strong nuclear force, there will be multiple fields inside of space-time that deal with how chemistry bonds and things that allow us to have that universality in time to everything in the universe, where there's a more efficient universe in a dualiverse concept, in which everything's related back to a singularity and a set of forces that come from that, then there's efficiency in the universe. There's the strong nuclear force is not embedded in its own point in time. All atoms would share the same strong nuclear force. So all atoms would be efficient. All atoms would be connected by this singularity ultimately, and thus the concepts of quantum entanglement, as whereas wormholes would still make sense because all atoms and everything are the same relative distance to this singularity that is at the center of space-time for its mass, and is in theoretically, if that singularity at the moment before the Big Bang, if that relationship, the Planck time, has maintained stability, then there has to be a constant holding that Planck time at that distance of time. So 141 to the 10 to the minus 45th of a second. It's one. In other words, that's how long the Planck time is versus the Planck. That's the same as the Planck length. And of course, the Planck length has to do, and time has to do with the movement, with the speed of light. How fast does it take the speed of light to go the Planck distance? And that's the Planck time. And but it's all based, again, conceptually off the speed of light. Now, we have to question the concept of what makes the speed of light constant, and that has to be space-time itself, because a massless particle, if it has no mass, automatically moves at the speed of light. So there's got to be something pushing that massless particle, because it accelerates to the speed of light instantaneously. So in T-theory, the space-time is actually a membrane. It's actually slowing down and keeping a massless particle to stay inside the universe. It needs to move at the speed of light, because it's actually outside the space-time membrane, which basically is the Planck time and the Planck length are all outside the space-time membrane, as well as if you accelerated matter up to the speed of light, that would be outside the space-time membrane. If you cool things down, in other words, you have absolute zero, that is beyond the space, that's an edge of the space-time membrane. Black holes are also an area of the space-time membrane, showing that the space-time membrane has borders. So that when we talk about I and me, all these parts are existing as kind of force fields in which we have both a universal I for humanity, we have a universal dream state for humanity, we have our own individual access to memory, but memory itself being a kind of a universal construct, in the sense we have the capability of remembering the passage of time, we have the capability of seeing things ordered and recognizing order, we have the capability of recognizing randomness and when randomness occurred, and then we all have the fundamental desire to survive. So these have to be all fundamental aspects of humanity, and would involve relating to our consciousness ultimately, and what we're conscious of, whether it's our personal individual selves and how far we can extend up our survival from a raw survival of life and just surviving to survival of humanity over and in the long run, where if we remember that if we have the capability of remembering things, then the longer that we as a humanity stay alive, then the things that we remember, such as theoretical physics and all the sciences and all the religions and all the societies and all the governments, that if humanity becomes extinct, so do all these other things, because we have the mind that is inside the brain, so to speak. The brain acts as a sense receptor, and the mind is an adaptable receptor for energies that are out there, and we're able to sense these things, so that the longer that we stay alive as a humanity, the longer these things exist as a collapsing the wave function, if you want to call it that. Otherwise, there won't be anybody here to collapse the wave function, and things won't, quote, exist in a reality, so to speak, unless humanity is there to see it happen. I would like to bring one other aspect, since we're relating everything back to energy. Remember, T-theory always says, what is this? Everything has to come back to energy. What's the single thing in the universe? And if we're talking about energy, and we're talking about the size limit of the universe, so the size limit so right now, if we look at the size limit as we are at the moment of now, right now, we would look back and say, well, we're at the largest size limit we are right now, which could be relative to us infinity, right? Because it says that the universe is accelerating, and we've gotten to the point that the acceleration may be happening faster than the speed of light itself at certain stages, such that we would be, we have this infinite growing universe that is mathematically infinite, in which it's beyond all numbers. Infinitely, the numbers are just infinity. So the size limit right now is infinity, but then we go backwards in time, where we go, say we go back to, or say 300, we're going backwards in time, 13.7 billion years back to supposedly zero. But as we go back further, the size limit gets smaller and smaller. And then we get to a point, again, where we talked about the size limit of where space-time breaks down is the Planck sphere, where at this distance, the time here, the Planck time was 10 to the minus 45th of a second, right here, and so that's where space-time breaks down. So that, but if we get here, we're talking about the size limit. A lot of times when theoretical physicists are trying to determine the energy of the universe, they come down to these points where this is empty space, in which empty space doesn't get smaller than this Planck time or this Planck length of 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, in which it starts breaking down. So we have this size limit which comes down to here, which is at the Planck length and Planck time, and this is where the waves of quantum mechanics and strings of string theory come into existence. But then we're talking about the size limit of the universe at before the Big Bang. Remember, so this is the moment before the Big Bang. The Big Bang would start as soon as we broke symmetry. However, we're talking about size limit. It doesn't mean mathematics wants to take this down to numbers. So where infinity gets smaller and smaller, it goes down to zero, but zero is not a true zero in the sense that we're talking about size limit. What is the limit? It's not zero size, it's zero size limit. So in some ways, this is where true infinity exists, because this is going to be, since space-time does not breaks down here, then space-time isn't relevant here, and its only thing that can be is energy time. So the energy time limit is zero energy time limit. So there's zero time, there's zero size limit, because there's zero energy time limit. And but there's a difference between numbers, infinity in numbers, and infinity in energy. The difference is that basically infinity in energy can give you infinity of numbers. Sorry for my infinity. But the infinity in energy can give you an infinity in numbers, because you can create a space-time that is stable, that can allow for numbers to exist, and of course we've accelerated we've added energy to the universe. It's not a closed universe in the sense that we have infinite volume now of space-time. So the volume has gotten infinitely large, because we have an infinite number of Planck spheres now, each Planck sphere has, a radius of 2 times the Planck length. So, actually, take that back. The diameter is 2 times the Planck length. Anyway, the idea being here is that energy can create numbers. However, you're not going to get a total theory of everything, a mathematical equation to be able to create. It's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to have numbers create energy, because numbers can't create energy, because numbers represent a scaffolding of space-time, and again, the Planck constant, that stability. And this is also why we have the prediction of 10 to the 120 that would be in the center of space-time, where theoretical physicists say we only get the measurement for space-time itself of equaling, per cubic meter, there's 2 protons per cubic meter of space-time, and that's stable throughout all space-time. So we know that there's and that's basically, the relation of 1 over 10 to the 120. So that's the value that we get for space-time, is the energy of space-time. However, the theoretical physicists predict having the energy of zero-point energy, I guess, being at 10 to the 120 power, which they don't see, but in T-theory, that would make sense if the singularity was a point of energy creation state, which was energy imbalance. That energy imbalance is a supersymmetry, which, surprisingly enough, mathematics and mind use today to understand reality. So there would be an impression, again, of that supersymmetry upon space-time, as well as the forces and the dimensions should be throughout all space-time, not just in our particular body of time. So that in the concept of the moment of now, we all have individual time. However, there is a universal energy that is embedded prior to where the Higgs field and all the force fields exist to hold together the matter particles, and the imbalances to keep that imbalance there, keep that broken symmetry there. All those things are staying stable. All the constants, all the scaffolding, and all the thermodynamic laws, all the laws of classical physics, all those things are staying stable over and in time. So thus, time has to be relative to being efficient, has to be universal in the sense that the same forces right here are being applied on the opposite side of the universe, and they were the same forces applied within a second of the formation of space-time. So that's what T-theory would say. They're all the same forces. They're all tied together because the energy of the universe is efficient. Efficiency is based upon just observing human beings and the fact that to have life, all our proteins, all the things, even our mind, to get us from point A to point B, we can shorten the time if we're accelerating it ourselves mentally. We can shorten the distance. We can increase the density and the importance of things. And what we choose to work on based upon understanding the relativeness to relationships, to mathematical relationships, to mental relationships of individuals, to laws of nature, to the laws of society. In other words, how we integrate all these individual awarenesses that determine our outcome, that when we do judge something and we collapse the waveform into a physicality, that when we actually become manifest, we collapse the waveform, we become physical, just as like we saw earlier, that I can create a force just by pushing on myself. I can take mind into forces, I can take mind into waves, I can take mind into information by just having the context of what I'm talking about. I can take mind into particles, in which I can put this on a thumb drive and hand it to you, and you could look. It's like a particle now has a place in space time. The idea is that, again, there's this relationship of the nature of mind, how we relate to it in the now moment, how we insert our intentions into the moment of now, collapse the wave function and create reality such that The laws aren't predetermined, even though mathematical laws have a aspect of symmetry to them. We are in a broken symmetric state. What broke the symmetry was an intention. So thus, our intentions can override even our, if we decide to end our life, which is, the fundamental is that we want to think for humanity that wants to survive. Yeah, we can obviously commit suicide by our own intentions, by whatever those we decide those to be. So the intention can actually override just the fundamental laws of life. So an intention is a stronger energy force when we tap into it than other energy forces, such as the desire to survive. So that's how powerful the intention energy can be. Is letting us know that it's going to turn red, and then when it turns red, we're supposed to stop. So it's through our, basically, again, in T-theory, it's our intention that tells us what we want to do, so it has to be an energy for intention, but in the process of that intention, we basically sense the light, we just sense that it's a red, we go by the laws of our social society, and the fact that we don't want to break the law. That's the rationale, that's the collapse of the wave function, or our past